What's up everyone? Welcome back to another video. Today's video will be going over what you need to know to fit 33s on your first Gen Sequoia. First we'll go over the wheel sizes and measurements you'll need to know to give you the most room to fit the 33s. After that we'll go over tire dimensions, explain what all of that means, and then I'll go around and show you all the places the tires will rub and how to correct that. First we'll start off with the wheel sizes. The set I have is a 17 by 8.5 -12. So the 17 is the overall height of the wheel. That is what size tire you're going to buy to match that wheel. 8.5 is how wide my wheel is, so my wheel is 8.5 inches wide, and the -12 is the offset of the wheel. If you had a 0 offset wheel, the center of the hub would be perfectly aligned with the middle of the wheel. Mine is a -12, so the center of my wheel is 12 millimeters away from the hub. That offset is one of the numbers you'll really have to pay attention to when it comes to fitting the 33s on your Sequoia. To give you guys a better look at what the -12 looks like with a 33, you can see it sticks out just a little bit, but not too much. This is my favorite size wheel. The reason the offset is so important when it comes to fitting the 33s is if you have your tire and wheel pushed out too far, it'll give it a longer swing, which means it will be more likely to hit in the mud flap area and the front bumper. If you go too positive with your offset, that'll push the wheel and tire in, and then you won't have clearance on your upper control arm. So the tire will actually rub on the upper control arm, and then the tires won't fit. -12 is my favorite. Don't have too much rubbing in the back. I wanted to keep the mud flaps on, so I do have a little bit of rubbing back here. If I were to take the mud flaps off, I wouldn't have any more rubbing. If you only ever want to go with 33s, no bigger than that, 0 offset would be your best bet to just get the most clearance. But I think the -12 looks a little bit better, gives you a little bit of poke with the tread, but not too much to where it's flinging rocks. If you're still running your factory wheels, those I believe are a +15 offset. So if you go to the 0 millimeter offset, that will be 15 millimeters pushed out farther. And if you go to the -12 millimeter offset, that will be 27 inches farther out than your factory wheel. The next measurement we'll go over is the tire size. My tires are a 285/70/17. 285 is how wide the tire is. It is 285 millimeters wide. 70 is the sidewall height. That is 70% of 285 millimeters. And 17 is the wheel diameter, which is just the inside of the tire. All the fitment stuff I'm going to be talking about is relative to the 285/70/17s. Technically, they're just under 33 inches, but everyone calls them a 33. As for making 33s fit in the rear, you don't really have to do anything. There's plenty of clearance back here for, I think 35s people run without any modifications. But nothing you really have to worry about in the back. As for the first place you'll really rub, back in the mud flap area, a lot of people say you have to cut this up and hammer the pinch weld back. I didn't have to do any of that. The only thing I did change about the mud flap area is I removed one of the center screws. The tire would clip that on the way by and make a lot of noise. Once I removed that, it just barely touches. I do off-road quite a bit, and I've had the suspension fully bottomed out and turning, and I haven't had any issues with that rubbing through or rubbing very hard. The way I fixed the rubbing in the mud flap area is by maxing out the caster on the lower control arm. You do have some eccentric bolts at the lower control arm on the front and back. If you push the front one all the way in towards the car and the back one all the way out, that will move the wheel and tire about a ½ inch forward. After you move the wheel and tire about a ½ inch forward, you might have some slight rubbing here. You could trim that if you want. I've left it. I haven't had any issues. Another way people will try and get more clearance at the back of the fender is by giving the car more caster at the upper control arm. That'll actually give you less room at the back. If you adjust the caster to give it more at the bottom, it moves the wheel forward. If you adjust it at the top, it will lean that way, which will actually move the center bore back, which gives you less room in the back there. And the way I fixed the rubbing on the fender flare is by getting a slightly longer bump stop. I went with the Perry Parts bump stops that are made for the 33-inch tires. They've been great. That's probably the biggest improvement I've made off-road, is just going from those stock bump stops to the Perry Parts. I have almost jumped the Sequoia a couple times. I almost did down there. Front tires came off the ground and on the way back down, I didn't have any contact with the tire defender. Here's a better look at those Perry Part bump stops. You replace the rear one with the Perry Part, and that pretty much solves all the rubbing you get with the fender and smooths out the ride a ton off-road. The last thing we'll talk about is what size lift you need to fit 33s, and the answer is you don't need a lift. Despite what everyone says, a lift will not make you fit 33s. The second you compress the suspension back to the stock height or even past the stock height, you'll be right back to rubbing. So a lift is pretty much just a band-aid on top of the rubbing issue you have. The real way to make sure the tires actually fit is to take the front strut out, compress it up to the bump stops, and turn the wheel back and forth and make sure it doesn't rub. I didn't pull the strut out to make sure it fit. I just found a place where I could flex the car out a little bit. Got the suspension compressed to the bump stops and turned back and forth. I had a slight bit of rubbing in the back, but not enough to cause any damage. And the little part where it clipped in the front, but I just don't feel like cutting that. Barely touches that, but not even enough to rub off the paint. Now that we've gone over all that, I hope that answers some of your questions. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. Thanks for staying till the end. Leave a like, subscribe, helps the channel out a ton. And I will see all you guys in the next one.